Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Christina Braver, and she writes steamy small town contemporary romance, usually set in the Pacific Northwest. Her stories are about strong heroes with softer sides, independent heroines with a bit of sass, and the guaranteed happily ever after we all need. So we learned about that, all that, and she has a master's degree in clinical psychology and uses that knowledge to create well-rounded, character-driven stories described by her a bit nerdy, a bit much more romantic. We can look at that. Welcome to the show, Christina.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about romance novels. We'll talk about romance. We'll talk about what romance reveals about people. We'll talk about that. But before that, let's talk a bit about your background, your journey, so that people know who they are listening to.
Well, as you mentioned, I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and I worked for several years as a therapist and a social worker. But that is an art and a science, and the science was for me, but the art was not for me. It's a challenging job, and so I moved out of that space and into a more healthcare general space. And I worked in hospitals. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so I worked in healthcare technology for about 20 years, and then with COVID, I made a job change. I was laid off like so many people during that time, and decided to stay home. I had some teenage age kids, and they really needed someone at home during that time. And so I decided to stay home, and I said, I'm going to go crazy or drive my children crazy if I don't have something to do. And I decided I love reading romance novels. And my husband said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I would like to read romance novels all day. And he said, well, you're smart. Why don't you write one? And so I did, and never looked back. It's been great. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about this word called romance. Has the meaning changed? Earlier on, romance used to be much more perhaps differently thought of, much more within certain confines, within certain boundaries. Maybe I don't know whether I'm using the right words to describe the romance of the year. But today, what does romance mean? Does it move towards much more extreme side of desires? Help us understand this thing called romance. Then we'll come to romance novel of yours.
Excellent. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. So for a long time, romance was the cover, the sort of bare-chested man cover on the steed with the damsel in distress in his arms, right? That sort of trope and idea. That is still out there, and no shade to that at all. That serves a purpose in the world, and it's lovely and wonderful in lots of ways. But that's not all that romance is, for a couple of reasons now. In the early aughts, e-readers hit the scene. And so you could read anything you wanted to, anywhere you wanted to, and nobody would know what you were reading on an e-reader. So a lot of times historically, people who read romance, it was something they did in the privacy of their home because it was, for some reason, something they were embarrassed about, or felt that other people were looking down on them because of it. And so they sort of hid that. But now with e-readers, you can read all the romances you want at whatever steam level or, explicitness level that you wanted to, and nobody would know what you're reading. And so that opened up romance to a wider audience, much, much wider audience. In fact, the romance genre was the most impacted by e-readers hitting the scene again in the early aughts. The next big change happened around 2019. The largest professional writing organization for romance writers, the Romance Writers of America, was embroiled in scandal around racism and sexism. And a lot of the traditional publishers were implicated to one degree or another, along with a lot of private author or what we call self-published authors. And what happened, it started a great conversation, and a lot of very successful traditionally published authors moved to self-publishing and writing the books of their heart. So there was a time when romance was only cisgender heterosexual couples, and that time is no longer here. Now we have a much more diverse we group of main characters in books, characters from all ethnicities, all genders, all orientations. There are romance novels out there for you. There was a time when that wasn't the case, but now it is. And so you have a much wider audience reading romance now. And and also romance, I write steamy romance, which is usually a word meant to indicate that I write explicit, so or what's called open door. You're in the room with the couple when when the physical part of romance is happening. But not all romance is explicit. There's clean romance, which is sometimes they don't even talk about physical intimacy. Then there's a closed door where physical intimacy is mentioned, but you don't hear anything about it. And then there's open door, which is what I write, where the physical intimacy is mentioned and described in a little bit more detail. So there's a lot of different kinds of romance today.
Lots of different kinds of romance, lots of different kinds of audience. What is the kind of audience which is the new audience for this sort of romance novels or romance writing, or whatever way we want to call it?
I mean, I think the predominantly romance novels are read by women. Also, usually it's women but anywhere between 18 and 45 is sort of the group, the biggest group, but we have more men writing romance. I certainly encourage men to read romance for a variety of reasons. There are certainly people who are getting access to romance novels earlier than 18, even, some of the open door, more explicit books. In the United States, sex education is not something that is emphasized still. There's still 12 states in the union that don't require sex education to be fact-based, and that's concerning. That's it. Sex is an important part of our lives, and we need good information about it. So a lot of people are turning to other resources, some of them not so helpful. But I try to encourage people to take a look at romance. Now, some people are looking at romance novels for education. They're not necessarily intended to be sex education, but they are an opportunity for some people who are just starving for information. It's an opportunity to get some information. And so what I do, and a lot of other writers are doing, is putting real information into our romances. Because it's romance is a $1.4 billion annual industry. So that's a lot. That's a huge platform to get information out.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if I heard you correctly, you say men write mostly and women read mostly, 18 to 45.
Right. Women write it mostly. Mostly romance is mostly written by women and mostly read by women. But there are men who write it. And I encourage a lot of men to read it as well. It can give an insight into the female mind sometimes.
Absolutely. So let's try and understand this. Means, what does it tell about, not about the writers, obviously there's a market for it, but about those people who are reading it, especially women who are reading it, 18 to 45, as we said, that what romance reveals about you, what it can tell about ourselves. What does it tell about the reading segment? Let's use this word.
Absolutely. So the readers, I don't know that it says anything necessarily about the people who are reading it, about them as a group, only that maybe they are interested in escapism. Sometimes that, the fantasy, the escape of reading a romance. The one gold standard thing that all romances have, if it's going to be considered a romance genre book, is a happy ending, some sort of happy ending. So definitely during COVID times, stress times, romance explodes because you're going to have a happy ending. And in the end, it's all going to work out okay. So I think there's a lot of people that are attracted to romance for that reason. What I talk about also is that reading romance can tell us some things about ourselves if we're attracted to particular kinds of romances, or more specifically, romantic partners. So I encourage people to what kind of romance stories are you drawn to as an individual, and then what does that tell you about yourself? Um, Romance is a fantasy for sure. Also, there's things that happen in romance that are not safe in real life. So some romances, you meet someone and you're instantly attracted to them, and then you may go home with them for a physical intimacy moment, or you may decide to go on a trip with them. I'm writing a book now where they meet and they decide to go on a trip together right away, which is not really safe in real life. To meet someone and then 5 minutes go home with them or take a trip with them is not really safe in real life. But the fantasy of doing that is perfectly safe, in reading about that in a book. So I think that's a big draw for romance as well. There's things we call tropes that are sort of consistent themes or consistent things that happen in a story. Things like a brother's best friend, where like it's always that the female main character falls for, or whatever gender main character falls for their brother's best friend, right? And so that there's tons of stories written about that. There's a big fantasy and trope is what we call the bad boy redeemed. And this one I like to talk about this one because I think culturally, a lot of times, stereotypically, people believe that women sort of fall for the bad boy. The nice guys don't get as much attention as the bad boy does. And maybe, I'm not sure if that's true or not, but maybe it is. Bad boys are not really safe. Are not really safe. I mean, I think a lot of maybe women we tell ourselves, oh, he'll be different for me, right? His love for me will change me. That doesn't always happen in real life. In fact, it probably happens very rarely in real life. But in a romance novel, that happens quite a bit, that bad boy redeemed. So you have that escapism experience. And then another thing that I tell people is sort of pay attention to what sort of fantasies or tropes you're drawn to. Do you find yourself reading stories a lot? One of the things that I really like is the sort of damsel in distress who gets rescued by this, lovely man, and what that tells me about myself. I'm a bit of a type A person. I have a lot of responsibilities raising children. My husband is in tech and very accomplished professionally, and we have a lot of responsibilities. And sometimes I just want somebody to come in and sweep all those responsibilities away. I need a little break from those responsibilities. So that's sort of what I've learned about myself. It's like, I love to read about the idea of this big, strong hero coming in and taking me away from all of this, right? I don't actually want someone to come in and take me away from all of this. I love my life, but that's a fantasy that I have, and that's the story that I'm drawn to. So that's something that I know about myself, and I can share that with my partner. I can say, hey, husband, let's go away for the weekend. I don't want to think about anything else, anything that's going on here. That would really feed my soul right now. So that's information I've learned about myself from reading romance novels. So
Absolutely. Let's learn about the people again who are reading it. When you plan your novels, how do you know, okay, what is your target audience? Who is your ideal, what you call persona that you are targeting? And how do you plan that out? That will give an insight on exactly who is going to read that sort of and what are they looking for. You also talked about, okay, first let's listen to this, then to ask other questions.
so I think my ideal reader is someone who enjoys reading. Obviously, I usually assume that my reader is going to be female, but that's not always the case. I write what's called dual POV. So one chapter is in a female perspective and one chapter is in a male perspective. So I encourage couples sometimes to read them together, but I think my ideal reader is someone who is looking for a good character driven story. They want a good growth arc. They don't just want fluffy romance or a lot of explicit information. Again, my books are explicit, so there are those scenes in there, but that's not the focus of the story. And my readers they want deeper more flawed characters. So I try to have my characters be more realistic in their flaws. So maybe they're not physically perfect. Maybe they aren't. Maybe they're neurodivergent in some way, or they struggle with mental health in some way, or their sexual confidence, education, experience is challenged in some way. Everything doesn't always work smoothly in those relationships. So I'm looking for a reader who wants that sort of challenge. That's the reader that I'm writing for. I want them to also be ready for happy ending and to want things to be pretty and beautiful sometimes, but I also want them to be prepared for learning a little bit about themselves, maybe some sexual education, as well as the experience of a deeper story.
Absolutely. So, in terms of, you see, you talked about happy endings. You
Mhm.
also talked about, about your own thing. What is it, you like? Other endings, like those things which you talked about, the bad guys, the not so good guys, somebody, who may fulfill some part of things that you may not risk in real life, but you may look at it from a fantasy point of view. Now,
Exactly.
in this, you see, in this, our society in today's time, in real life, a lot of women want equality,
Mhm.
and they and at that point, women empowerment and all. And on the other side, they're looking for that escapism, if that's the right word, into
Mhm.
characters which are much more, uh, masculine, which takes away all the responsibility and let them, you can say, live that life which is not happening in the real life, or which may be happening, but it is not as perfect as it is in those novels. How do you see this? Or are these escapism a good thing in that sense, or will it impact the real life also? May people are, desires are something which may, push you slightly towards finding the same thing, in real life. How do you see this part of this whole thing that is happening in nowadays?
Right, and I think what you're describing, what you're describing about society in India, I think is what's happening. Is certainly happening in the U.S., and I would venture to say in many cultures, women are much more empowered for equality, have much more agency and voice today, and are seeking more of that. And I think I hear what you're saying. There are people who struggle with reading some of those books where the female character is more submissive or yeah, more submissive, and sometimes we just want to have that fantasy. I don't I don't think that reading romance about a submissive character, submissive female character, means that you want to be submissive. Actually, I think it means more the opposite. Um, Studies show that a lot of times what we fantasize about are things that we don't have or don't want in real life. We just have that fantasy and that want to have that experience temporarily. That's a very common theme in a lot of fantasies, both those that have physical intimacy involved in them, but then also just more relationship fantasies or just fantasies about life. Sometimes that's what makes it a fantasy. We fantasize about living on a desert island or a deserted island, not a desert island, a deserted island. But that doesn't mean that we actually want to make that happen. So um, I think so. A lot of my female characters are very strong. In fact, all my female characters are strong, independent women who struggle with some of the challenges that I'm sure that men have struggled with over time. Having, the pressures of being the leader, the pressures of being the provider, the pressures of having all the responsibility. Women are moving into that role more and more, and they're experiencing those same pressures too, and sometimes need to escape from that. And I think wanting to escape from that doesn't necessarily mean they don't want what their life is. They just want to take a vacation for a minute and then go back to what their life really is. And that's really, like I said, research is finding that that's very common for both men and women to have those kinds of fantasies, escapism to a world we don't really want to go there. We just want to visit for a minute, and then we want to come back to our real life that we've worked really hard to create. Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. I understand that. Do men ever write to you back, any feedback? Do they? give your readers? Obviously, men must be reading those.
Yes, I do hear some feedback from men. It's a little bit few and far between. Reading romance is not something that a lot of men culturally certainly feel comfortable admitting that they do, because romance forever has been seen as written. It's fantasy for women by women. We don't need to pay attention to that, which is not true. I think men, like I said, men can learn a lot about women and what they're thinking about by reading romance novels, but you have to look below the level. You have to look kind of one level below the top surface to really understand the content of what's happening in the book. May not necessarily be what the woman wants. What the woman wants is a feeling of maybe like some fantasies are being the the heroine is overwhelmed. Like sometimes the person it can be a dangerous situation where the hero wants the heroine so much that she just can't resist, right? That's not safe in real life. That's illegal. So reading books, a woman who reads a book about that doesn't necessarily want that to happen to her in real life, right? But what she wants is that, go one layer down, she wants that her lover to be so overcome with affection, love, passion for her that they can't control themselves, and then they want to create a safe space with their safe person, right, to have that experience. So I do hear from some men, mostly that they like how I've written my male characters, that they're a little bit more nuanced, that they're not perfect, but also that they are good guys. I think men in today's society, a lot of men are in general getting some there's bad ideas. I think about some men out there are not good. And if you're one of those guys, stop being bad. Like, just stop it. But there's a lot of men out there that are good, that want their partner to have a good time emotionally, physically, passionately. They care about their partner, and those are the heroes, the kinds of heroes that I write. And I think I hear from my male readers that they appreciate that perspective, that my male characters are just as nuanced as my female characters.
Right. So in your novels, do the good guys you talk about happy endings? So do the good guys win or the
Yeah.
bad guys win?
No, the good guys always win. The good guys always win, or the bad guy becomes reformed, which again doesn't always happen in real life. But the bad guy becomes reformed and turns into a good guy, or the bad guy was bad for a reason, but deep down inside he's really good, and that loving her allows the goodness to come out, and everybody's happy. Every time. Yes.
Every time a woman's project is complete, many people say, in that sense, that women look at one project at a time, several projects at a time. But I don't want to get into any judgments here. For everyone it's different. One more thing I want to understand: how do you create your characters? Is it from what you see in public, what you see in society, or is it where you use your master's degree in clinical psychology?
Think it's a little bit of both. Sometimes I'll see something in society and I'll think, huh, that's interesting. But again, it's my psych background that I mostly lean on. I'll say, okay, what if someone with this emotional wound, either from childhood or from usually our developmental wounds are from childhood or young adolescence or early adulthood. So what if someone has this wound, maybe a neglectful parent, or they were raised in poverty? So they have these wounds and from these experiences, and then they meet this person who maybe has this wound, and they're attracted to each other and they fall in love. What what are the challenges that they're going to face? What are the things they need to overcome? What are the lies? A key component of most characters is, what is the lie they're telling themselves? For example, sometimes people who are raised in neglectful parent homes sometimes feel ultimately that they don't deserve love. So they may make choices, either not consciously, but make choices to choose a partner isn't nice to them, isn't good to them, because they don't deserve for somebody to be nice to them, and they won't demand better behavior from a partner. So that's sort of a common societal lie that we tell ourselves, and there are others. And so I take a look at those wounds, those experiences, the lies that those two characters might tell themselves, and then I make them fall in love and think about what are the challenges that they're going to need to overcome, and that's what I work through in the story.
Absolutely. Tell us a bit about your novels, Christina, romance novels.
Excellent. So I've written 8 books. I have 2 standalones. One is a novella length, and then I have a 6-book series of what's called interconnected standalones. So that 6-book series takes place in the same location. Each story has a different couple. It's not a sequel or a trilogy or anything like that. It's each book is a standalone book, but characters from other books may show up in the current book that you're reading. So that's, they all sort of live in the same world. They go to the same businesses, restaurants, things like that. So that's what they're interconnected standalones, but they can be read in any order. They are explicit, as I mentioned, because I focus so much on education and positivity. I think that a couple is so exposed and vulnerable in those physically intimate situations. And so I found that I couldn't write the characters I wanted to write without including some of those, or without including those physical intimacy situations and the conversations, the feelings and experiences that the characters are having in that space. So my books are explicit, and yeah, I have a lot of different, my books all have sort of a character growth arc, but then also sort of a sexual growth arc where their passion and experience is also something that evolves with their partner. That's a focus too, and that's more of the educational component of my books, and then also the character growth arc, learning that that lie that they're telling themselves is not true. So that's usually the character growth experience.
Absolutely. So where does this whole trend look like? Is it taking off, or is it going to, it is only a present trend? How does it look like to you, Christina, as an author?
Well, so I'm self-published. I don't have a traditional publisher. COVID really changed traditional publishing for a lot of genres of books. Traditional publishers sort of changed their model of publishing. But because of what I write, I chose to be self-published because I really want to write the books of my heart. I really want to write these characters. And so because I'm self-published, I have to do all of my marketing and that sort of thing. So there's that challenge. But I find that, it sort of, the people that are reading them, I'm getting a lot of positive feedback from, and it sort of takes off in spurts. It's not a get rich quick scheme at all. And there's so many people writing romance. It's a flooded market. So full disclosure, I do spend more money on my books than I make, but what's important to me is to get this message out, and I'm fortunate to have a supportive partner that I don't have to make money right now, and I think I feel called to do this work. It's not about the money for me. So yeah, so but to full disclosure, if you're thinking, oh, I want to be a writer, I want to write romance, it's a $1.4 billion industry, it's gonna take off wildfire, it's gonna be great. Maybe, maybe, but typically, be prepared for a long slog. But I, like I said, everybody that I talk to seems really positive about the book, and that feels good. And it picks up. There's people that tell me that I'm very successful. Sometimes I don't feel very successful, but there are people that tell me that, oh yeah, you're selling consistently, you're successful. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. You are doing a lot for love. You are doing a lot for romance. You are doing a lot for everyone who needs what they need, and that is a good thing. And then success will arrive if you are looking in terms of monetization of all these things. And I'm sure the market is understanding these things. It's a global market everywhere,
Mhm.
and people will have a chance to read it. That's the whole point of a lot of people from India will also be interested to understand what your kind of writing. So for all those people who would want to connect with you, learn more about you, about your books, want to get your books, what's the best way for them to do so, Christina?
So right now I'm available on Amazon.com. And then I'm also on, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. And my website is a great place to start with there's links to all of those things. And my website is simply ChristinaBraver.com. And I have a resources tab there where I have a lot of books that I have read, that I get a lot of my information, my educational information that I include in my books. So I always encourage people to take a look at the resources tab. But my website is a great place to start with links to follow me on social media. Right now, because of the situation in the United States, I have not been as involved in social media, but I am working on getting back into that. Also, I just finished the first draft of my next book, so that was pretty distracting. But I've sort of laid low on social media, but I'm still there. It's just a slow trickle right now. But yeah, that's a great place. My website is a great place to start.
Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.